Welcome to the Creative Kobold. I'm Gyra. It's time for a look at some cheap D&D miniatures. Today we're checking out Tehnolog, a Russian company that makes miniatures in 28mm and 54mm scale. Tehnolog have both sci-fi and fantasy products, as well as some cute chibi minis. However, I'll be showing and speaking of their normal style 28mm fantasy miniatures, of which there are 10 different sets. Each set contains 4 different sculpts, except for one that has 7. Dwarves. The 4 sculpts in the Dwarves set are as follows. Dwarf with a 2-handed maul. Dwarf with a bearded axe and oval shield. Dwarf with a bardiche and buckler. Dwarf with a large war axe blowing a horn. These are very classic looking dwarves that should fit into most fantasy games. They all have quite different styles, and the bardiche wielder has a Roman inspired outfit, so he could fit well into the next set as well. You can get a set of 32 for $8. Fantasy Romans. The 4 sculpts in the Fantasy Roman set are as follows. Roman soldier with spear and gladius. Roman soldier with spear and scutum. Roman soldier with gladius. Roman soldier with gladius and scutum. The sculpts in this set are very similar in style. There are some small differences between some on their armor or helmets, but not much. However, for guards or soldiers, this is usually what you'll want anyway. You can get a set of 20 for $8. Crusaders. The 4 sculpts in the Crusaders set are as follows. Crusader with longbow. Crusader with spear and heater shield. Crusader with greatsword and heater shield. Cloak-wearing Crusader with arming sword and heater shield. These guys are perfect for paladin-style characters. They prominently display a typical Knights Templar cross on their chest, and the helmets have cross-shaped openings for their mouth and eyes, giving these characters a connection to Christianity. This might be fine for more historically based games, but it's my personal preference not to have any obvious links to the real world in my fantasy games. And while the cloaked Crusader is wearing a proper tabard over his armor, the other 3 seems to be wearing a strange crossbreed of tabard and monastic scapular. This, in addition to the very cool looking wings on the sides of their helmets, makes them less useful in more accurate historically based games. Aside from these details, however, I really like the Crusader sculpts. You can get a set of 20 for $8. Knights. The 4 sculpts in the Knights set are as follows. Knight with longbow. Knight with crossbow. Knight with bearded axe and heater shield. Knight with arming sword. In my opinion, these might be the least inspired designs among all the 10 sets. That said, They are pretty much perfect for use as very generic knights or soldiers in heavy armor, which can come in handy quite often if your games have, for example, fights inside of cities or different countries waging war against each other. Sometimes you just need some generic soldiers as either allies or enemies in your battle encounters. You can get a set of 20 for $8. Dark Warriors. The 4 sculpts in the Dark Warrior set are as follows. Knight with arming sword and oval shield. Crusader with longsword. Fighter with arming sword and sword breaker. Executioner with executioner's axe. From the least inspired set to the most inspired one. While the knight might be the least unique looking, he still has a lot of character to him. The Crusader has a very different style than those in the Crusader set, but does share the cross-shaped helmet opening for the eyes and mouth with them. The fighter gives off the feeling of being a veteran, confident about the fight in front of him. And the executioner looks dark and sinister. I would say these are all great for use as player characters, villains, or other notable NPCs in your game. You can get a set of 32 for $8. Defenders of Realm. The 4 sculpts in the Defenders of Realm set are as follows. Defender with short sword and rectangular shield. Defender with spear and oval shield. Defender with Danish war axe. Defender with longsword and kite shield. Here's a somewhat interesting set. First off, the first 3 of these look quite different from each other, but similar enough that they might all belong to the same town guard or militia, and they would work perfect for that. The 4th and last sculpt, however, intrigues me. Remove the crossguard on the sword, as well as the weird armor piece on his chest, and exchange the kite shield for a round one, and you'd have a pretty decent Viking. The helmet is based on a historically accurate Viking helmet too. Though Vikings usually wore tunics and trousers, I think robes might still have been worn by some Vikings. You can get a set of 32 for $8. Vikings. The 4 sculpts in the Vikings set are as follows. Viking with arming sword and heater shield. Viking with bearded axe and targe. Viking with short bow. Viking with crossbow. Let me first state that these are not actually Vikings. These are the most extreme pop culture misrepresentation of Vikings. Wearing horns on their helmets and next to no armor or even clothing, as well as having weapons and shield of completely different origins. If you want to depict historically accurate Vikings in your games, stay far away from anything near what these look like. However, these work quite well as Conan-style barbarians in fantasy games. You can get a set of 20 for $8. Russians. The 4 sculpts in the Russian set are as follows. Russian soldier with Viking sword and kite shield. Russian soldier with bearded axe and kite shield. Russian soldier with spear and kite shield. Russian soldier with drawn longbow. Soldiers from the same land as the makers of these miniatures. I can only assume they are depicting their ancestors somewhat historically accurate. I do know that some Russian swords were similar to those of the Vikings, which makes sense as Russia is a neighbor to Scandinavia, so that explains the first one with a Viking sword. They also used kite shields. However, that's where my knowledge of Russian medieval equipment ends, but as far as I can tell, these should work great for more historical games, as well as for soldiers in most fantasy settings. You can get a set of 20 for $8. Barbarians. The 4 sculpts in the Barbarian set are as follows. Barbarian with spear and targe. Barbarian with bearded axe and targe. Barbarian with longbow. Barbarian with arming sword and targe. The first 3 sculpts here just looks like Neanderthals with medieval weapons. Their weapon selection isn't what you'd typically associate with a barbarian in fantasy settings, which makes them unlikely to be used for player characters. I also have to point out the balloon biceps of the one with the longbow. They all have huge muscles, but this guy's biceps are just ridiculous. However, the plus side of this set is the 4th sculpt that's included. This barbarian is ready for adventure, with a bedroll and a large sack of items strapped to his back, a full pouch on his hip, a great top knot, and the most majestic moustache you'll ever see on a miniature. This last sculpt feels like an actual character, and the set is worth the money for him alone. You can get a set of 20 for $8. Orks and Goblins. The 7 sculpts in the Orks and Goblins set are as follows. Ogre with maul and targe. Ogre with Morningstar. Orc with single-edged blade and targe. Spined Orc, dual-wielding jagged short swords. Goblin with damaged scimitar. Goblin with longsword. Goblin with short bow. This set is both very interesting and very frustrating. The goblins look great and none would doubt they are goblins, but their size is just way too large for goblins in D&D or Pathfinder. The orc with the strange blade is pretty much spot on, but the other one has spikes going down his spine. I'd call it a Tehnolog, but it has no horns. The 2 ogre-like creatures could perhaps have been half ogres, but for some reason they have hairy cloven feet. I really enjoy these sculpts, but I don't know what to do with them. I might have to homebrew some new creatures or subraces for their use. But if you're not that picky about the details and sizes, this is a great way to get a bunch of goblins, orcs, and ogres. You can get a set of 21 for $10. So those are all the Tehnolog 28mm fantasy sets. The plastic is hard and thin parts can break off if you're not careful, but it's not very different from Warhammer or a lot of other wargaming minis, as far as I can tell. The amount of mold lines and flash varies from nearly nothing to a decent amount, so you'll have to do some cleaning up before priming and painting these. All in all, I really like a lot of these sculpts here. The detail is decent as well. For most of these, you might not want to get full sets, however. The solution here is to contact the seller and ask for the exact minis you want. Doing this, I got all these 43 miniatures for $22 plus $5 in international shipping. That's half a dollar per mini before shipping, and if that's not cheap, I don't know what is. As always, check the description below for a link to the seller. I'll also link to Blanco's 2 Tehnolog review videos, which I suggest checking out. Now, get yourself some cheap miniatures, and I will see you in the next video.